We are following a couple of breaking news stories that really move forward and advance the story we led with in the last hour. The troubled, increasingly scandal-plagued candidacy of the man Donald Trump has tapped to lead the Pentagon, former Fox News weekend morning anchor Pete Hegseth. Just in the past few minutes, we have two new headlines, two new bodies of reporting to tell you about. NBC News is now reporting that Republicans in the Senate, quote, are growing increasingly skeptical about Hegseth. Three Republican sources with direct knowledge of his nomination process telling NBC News that as many as 6 Senate Republicans, perhaps more, are currently not comfortable supporting Hegseth's bid to lead the Pentagon. And the seemingly daily new allegations are, quote, taking a toll, putting that nomination in peril. And as if on cue, we now have explosive new reporting from NBC's national security correspondent, Courtney Kube. Here's the eye-popping headline on that piece of reporting, quote, Pete Hegseth's drinking worried colleagues at Fox News. The report continues, quote, Hegseth drank in ways that concerned his colleagues at Fox News, according to 10 current and former Fox News employees, 10. Two of those people said that on more than a dozen occasions during Hegseth's time as a weekend anchor, they, quote, smelled alcohol on him before he went on the air. Quote, one of the sources said they smelled alcohol on him as recently as last month, end quote. Joining us now for this breaking news, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles and NBC News national security correspondent Courtney Kube, both of them bylined on these reports. Ryan Nobles, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Nicole, it does seem increasingly clear that Pete Hegseth has a hill that is getting steeper by the moment when it comes to winning confirmation by the United States Senate. We are reporting that as many as 6 Republican senators do not feel that they can cast a yes vote for him in his nomination process. Remember that he can only afford to lose 3 Republicans if every Democrat votes against him and to win confirmation. And really the issue is this, what seems to be a daily dose of new reporting around Hegseth's past that points to serious accusations about mistreatment of women, serious accusations about the abuse of alcohol, serious accusations about his mismanagement of the various organizations that he was in charge of. And, you know, when we talked to Republican senators before Thanksgiving, there was some optimism that Hegseth would be able to explain at least that initial round of allegations and that the loyalty to Donald Trump would be enough to push him over the finish line. We're getting a much different sense from Republicans today. They're concerned that there could be even more revelations that come out about his past that could put them in a difficult position to vote yes on his confirmation. I should point out that a lot of the reporting that I did about the future of his nomination came before this report that Courtney just dropped about his connections and the concerns about his alcohol use while at Fox News. So I think that this is not to say that his nomination is completely over with here. He still has a path to confirmation, and many of the senators, at least publicly, are saying that they want to give him the opportunity to explain his side of the story, that they want to be able to talk to him one-on-one. They want him to be able to sit for a public confirmation hearing where he answers some of these questions. And this might be the most important part of this process, Nicole. They want him to undergo a rigorous vetting, a rigorous background check, a background check that would include an FBI background check, which we know is something that is not a guarantee right now in this Trump transition process. And it feels at the very minimum, if these 6 senators that are right now uncomfortable, perhaps more, the only way that they're going to be flipped around is if he goes through that vetting process and they feel comfortable that whatever issues that he has in his past, he's put behind him and he's able to then appropriately run one of the most important agencies in the federal government, the agency with the biggest budget, with the most employees, and of course responsible for protecting American national security. There's no doubt that at this point right now, he has not proven up to that challenge, and it's going to take quite a bit of work for him to get to that point where he can get 50 votes in the United States Senate to be confirmed. Nicole.
I mean, Courtney, your reporting blows out of the water anyone's delusion that this behavior is behind him with reporting that at least in the category of alcohol abuse, it's as recently as last month. Take us through what you're reporting.
Yeah, so we spoke with 10 current and former Fox News employees who all talked about concerns that they had because of Pete Hegseth's drinking while employed at Fox. Now, as you know, Nicole, he was the host of a popular show, Fox and Friends, a weekend morning show. And according to these former and current colleagues, they said that there would be times where he would show up only minutes before the show was about to go on the air, sometimes talking about being hungover, at times even still smelling of alcohol from the night before. And as you know, when the host or the anchor of a show is showing up at the last minute and not ready to hit the ground running for a show, it put a lot of stress on that show and on those producers and on the staff at Fox News. Now, Nicole, this was something, according to these people we spoke with, that occurred over the course of years, as far back as 2016 and as recently as even this past year. Now, of course, Pete Hegseth terminated his contract with Fox News on November 12th when Donald Trump announced that he was going to be his choice to be Secretary of Defense. I should say the Trump transition team gave us a pretty scathing comment, calling these accusations, saying that they are false, and saying that this is the selection to be Secretary of Defense is a deployment that Pete Hegseth is ready to take on. But again, we spoke with nearly a dozen people about this who all told us the same thing, that his drinking really impacted the show and it caused a lot of stress on the people on that show. Now, this is one of the character issues that leads to the reporting that you and Ryan were just talking about. It's why we are hearing that some Republican senators, who frankly, some of whom would probably be pretty quick to support a nominee from President-elect Donald Trump, are having some concerns. They're worried about the now nearly daily drip of stories and accusations about Pete Hegseth that go to his character. There are the drinking allegations from when he was at Concerned Veterans for America that we heard about from the New Yorker. There's now this from his time at Fox News. There, of course, are the allegations that have gone back several weeks that we've been hearing about his treatment of women, allegations of sexual assault from several years ago. And when you consider all of those character concerns, that's why some of these senators, according to one of the officials who I spoke with today, they are worried about it. As Ryan mentioned, the Pentagon, $800+ billion budget, roughly 3 million people under this, inside this department. And more importantly, it is a job where literally lives are at stake with the decisions that you make. You sign the deployment orders for people to go overseas into combat zones. It is a tremendous responsibility. The enormity of the job is even overwhelming to some people who have years and years, decades of experience in government and military. And all of these character accusations, combined with Pete Hegseth's lack of experience, seem to really be taking a toll on the possibility that his nomination has a path forward, Nicole.
I mean, Courtney, you've talked to 10 sources. They all come from inside the Fox News empire. Ryan, you've got 6 sources, I think, six members. 3 sources describing 6 members who have paused. I just want to press both of you a little bit on the volume of people coming out from inside Pete Hegseth's own circle. These are not Democrats who appeared as the rare Democratic counter-argument point on the weekend show. I don't know if they do that. These are not people that served with them who went on to become Democratic activists. These are not critics. This is his mother, who describes him as a serial abuser of women and then says she later wrote him an email and apologized. This is the Monterey Police Department, who released a 22-page account of sexual assault, a woman who went and took a rape test at a hospital after what he described as consensual sex. It would be the first time consensual was used to describe someone who went and took a rape test, a rape kit. This is the story of someone who inside Fox News had to, based on your reporting, Courtney, quote, be babysat. I want to read what Fox News describes as the job when you work for Pete Hegseth. Quote, as a co-host, Hegseth needed to be at work early on weekend mornings for a show that began at 6 a.m. His female co-hosts would come in around 4 to prepare and have their hair and makeup done. Male co-hosts arrived around 5 or 5:15. One current and 2 former Fox employees said they felt like they needed to, quote, babysit Hegseth due to his drinking and late nights. Quote, we'd have to call him to make sure he didn't oversleep because we knew he'd be out partying the night before, one of them said. Another said, quote, morning TV is stressful. And more times than not, Pete made it even more stressful. Hegseth sometimes arrived with only 20 minutes or less before the show began, according to 3 sources. Stressing out his colleagues, they said Hegseth's makeup would sometimes need to be done while he was on set because of his late arrival, leaving his colleagues with such a small amount of time. The sources could not say whether his lateness was caused solely by his drinking. Courtney, I want to ask you to now storytell for us on the 24/7 nature of the job of Secretary of Defense, another piece of this report.
Yeah, so I mean, it really is genuinely a 24/7 job. Okay, so think of a couple of recent events. October 7th comes to mind. That occurred about midnight Eastern time was when the attack on Israel started. Secretary Austin, including a number of other people across Washington, were woken up and went into work and worked all through the next day. The China spy balloon story. Secretary Austin, when he got the call from the then Northcom commander at 3 o'clock in the morning while he was traveling in Manila, he was up for the rest of the day. And by the way, the next day after he got that call, after he was up throughout the night, he had to go all day long meeting with the president of the Philippines, Duterte, and work for another 12-hour day. So it's a relentless job. And the one that I keep talking about, because I think this really drives home the point of the enormity of this job, is Operation Noble Eagle. So this is the mission to defend the homeland. A lot of people probably don't know about it, but it's to defend the U.S. borders. And one of the responsibilities is for Northcom, NORAD, to defend the skies. So if an aircraft is coming in that could be potentially threatening to the Capitol, to an area where the president is, whatever it is, the phone call goes from NORAD to the Secretary of Defense. And it doesn't matter what time, day or night that is. That call comes in and you may have someone on the other line saying, Mr. Secretary, do we need to shoot down this aircraft? It's an enormous responsibility, you know.
Trump also made this holiday weekend announcement that he says, fire the FBI director that he named in his first term when Trump gets back in office. Now, let's just be clear right here. It is rare and major to fire any FBI director. They serve 10-year terms. They're some of the only executive officials who serve in such a long term precisely to avoid partisanship when administrations change hands. I'm putting up on the screen to remind you what it was like when Donald Trump, then as president, fired then Director Comey. It was huge breaking news across all the networks, interrupting coverage. It was seen for what it was, as a grave incident. It sparked the whole Mueller special counsel probe, and the headlines treated the move as a big, suspicious attack on the rule of law at the time. I show you that tonight by way of reference, because here we are, and Trump has now flooded the zone with so many extreme moves that this planned firing of his chosen director, Wray, is treated as something like a smaller subhead to this story. Take Politico, and this isn't a political observation, just they're a D.C. outlet, and they say Trump picks Patel to lead FBI. We have entered a period where it has been partially normalized to do something that I can tell you literally has almost never happened in history since the post-Hoover Watergate reforms, which is yanking an FBI director in the middle of their 10-year term. Now, firing the FBI pick without even a stated cause, again, is not normal and should not be treated as somehow a good idea or a normal part of law enforcement leadership, even if it is what the duly elected president-elect chooses to do. Donald Trump wants a partisan warrior to carry out his agenda. So there are actually 2 rule of law issues in all of these headlines: the planned firing of the director and a replacement who's widely criticized by his own former Trump-era colleagues and by Republican veterans like Bill Barr and by independent experts and by Democrats and civil libertarians. Kash Patel is facing mounting critiques over the facts of his record.
That FBI nomination is arguably a more extreme nomination than the accused child sex trafficker guy Trump wanted to make attorney general.
It doesn't surprise me that he will pick people that he believes are very loyal to himself, profoundly unqualified.
I don't know him. I have read some of his comments.
He agrees with Donald Trump that the Department of Justice should serve to punish, lock up, and intimidate Donald Trump's political opponents.
This is not a drill, and this is not going from a Biden official to a Trump official, which is part of staffing a new administration. It's going from a Trump official to Kash Patel, one of the most criticized sort of extreme MAGA figures you could find, because apparently the Trump first term isn't good enough for what they have planned. James, it would seem this is big and different than just some of the other posts. You might be skeptical on the idea that the oversight or Senate process is going to do much with one-party control. But should people care about what I just said, which is the normalizing of this breach?
Of course they should care. I mean, it's the FBI, it's the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My goodness, look at the National Intelligence Director. I mean, of course you should care. But the reason they're doing this is, you're right, it's not normal, and that's the reason they're doing it, because it's not normal. That's the objective, is not to be normal, and they don't have, best as I can tell, they don't have any intention of conformity or normalization or anything else that we've kind of known and expected out of the federal government. And the FBI, the FBI director is hugely influential in whether they open an investigation or close an investigation or what they do or what they don't do. We're going to find out just how influential it is. And maybe they'll, you know, Kash Patel, his logo is a K and then a $sign, Patel, which is kind of indicative of something now, isn't it? I don't know what, but I think
he hawks
it is.
a lot of products. Some of them are scams. Yeah, he's a big,
But being a scamster is what they're looking for. I don't know, but the new Attorney General nominee for designate, I've read somewhere where she's somehow involved in Scientology. Oh, maybe we ought to get Larry Wright to look into that, who is like the foremost authority on this. And I mean, we're going to get flooded. And I don't know if that's true about Ms. Bondi, but I think I read that, I heard it, but be clear about that. But it's something that definitely needs to be looked in, and I think it will be looked into.
Well, and you have hearings, and you typically have FBI background checks to look at all of that, and we're tracing down everything and giving people the benefit of response. Right. As you may know, we do something a little old-fashioned at this table here at the Beat. We try to get everybody on. Right. And then we fact check and discuss.
I know that.
So just last night, I had a former Trump official, who you might remember, Gordon Sondland, on.
Yeah, I don't remember.
And one of the defenses he makes of Trump now is what I mentioned earlier. He either says, don't take him literally, or you don't have to worry about that because he lies. And he argues, and you could call this a reach, or you could call it cynical, that the lies are part of the show. So just go with it. Here's how he makes that defense. Take a listen.
I don't believe for a second that Donald Trump is going to sell out Ukraine.
You mentioned whether Trump's going to sell out Ukraine. I mean, it's something he literally threatened to do before. Whether the threats go somewhere, right, we're all going to be tracking.
He also said people are eating dogs and cats, and they're not.
Right. So So you're using his falsehoods to say, okay.
They're not falsehoods. They're Trump hyperbole. It's the show. I love the show.
Is that an acceptable defense over the next 4 years? How do you, as a Democrat, address that? How do you counter that?
Well, I won't pay attention to what he says. I'll look what he does. He actually appointed Matt Gaetz to made him the designate to be Attorney General of the United States. He actually said, I want Kash Patel to be the FBI director. He actually said, I want Tulsi Gabbard to be the director of national intelligence. He actually said that he wanted Pete Hegseth to be the DOD head. I mean, I don't have to. Some seems like a nice man. I think I've met him once or twice. I think he was in the hotel business. It's probably a pretty good business. He's either a fool or he's playing a fool on TV. I can't make up which one it is, but it's one of the two. I don't have to pay any attention to anything he says. Just look at what he's doing.
Yeah.
That's all you got to do.
And I think that's fair. You're coming very close to calling the ambassador a fool on the hill, if you know that musical reference.
I mean,
do you remember that one? That's your era. It's a Beatles reference.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I remember when he was all tied up, I think he was the EU ambassador.
EU, and then he was a type of witness, yeah.
But he's like a personable guy. But what is he saying? You're just sitting there saying something that either he just chooses not to believe or is just saying in spite of it, or maybe Trump will see that and believe him. But they keep saying that. Oh, don't worry. It's fine. He just does that. That's just showmanship. Look at Project 2025, which is nothing but a bunch of crackpots and second-rate academics. and they're going to be some of the most powerful people in the United States government.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, I don't have anything to do with that. Okay, so they paid attention to him. And he gets in, look what he's doing. I think that Pastor Sunderland, you shouldn't pay attention to what he says. You should really pay attention to what he does. And what he's doing is so frightening, it's incomprehensible.
With us now is one of the journalists behind that great profile, New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig. So it's great seeing you. Good to see you. You know, I was struck, you know, when reading it, which I think everybody should. Jose Ortega y Gasset said, I am I plus my circumstances. Right. And everybody enters life and goes through life being impacted and changed by one's circumstances.
Well, and I always feel as a journalist, to understand somebody, you really have to understand their upbringing and their parents and what got them to where they are. It's so important. And when you think about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and what he went through just even in the first 20 years of his life, it's just a way to sort of understand him. It doesn't justify anything, but there's circumstances that are very important.
What are some of those that you think are more impactful in his life?
Well, I think early on, I mean, he went through both the assassination of first his uncle, John F. Kennedy, and then his father when he was running for president in 1968. And he's talked about those circumstances, particularly the assassination of his father, led him to drug abuse. And in his 20s, he was arrested for possession of heroin. He was a heroin addict. He actually has Hep C from using needles. I've talked to him about that. And these are just in the first 25, 26 years of his life. But then what you see is he became an addict, and he went through rehab, and he came out of that, and he says he hasn't used drugs since then. But what you've seen in his life is other extreme behavior that he has cycled through. And I think his addiction runs through his life, not just with drugs, which is obviously important, was very formative, but other addictions and other sort of extreme behavior that he's had. Some of it, people say, have, you know, not only has it been extreme, it's been dangerous when you look at some of the rhetoric that he's espoused about vaccines.
Yeah, many or some in the Kennedy family have had that same experience, had to go through drug addiction, some alcohol
a lot.
addiction.
Yeah.
But in his particular case, how does he go from, you know, being like what you were just mentioning, experiencing those traumas in life and then becoming an environmental lawyer and then, you know, having some would say extremely controversial thoughts and concepts about vaccines? How do you go from
That's the million-dollar question, because we do see him. He's a very successful environmental lawyer. He worked on cases with other lawyers that got national headlines. He got a lot of attention for that, but had sort of a track that looked very promising and very successful and not extreme. And then he moves into and almost leaves the environmental career behind him. He still has a law firm that does that with a partner of his. But for the most part, he went kind of headlong into vaccine rhetoric and just talking about the dangers of vaccines. I don't know what the break was and where that happened, but you've seen other extreme things in his life, whether it's he had philandering that it broke up his second marriage. In 2010, there was a divorce filing there, and a lot of it was just his extramarital affairs. He actually kept a diary at one point that parts of it became public, but have been reported on. So I don't know where the break was, but he does then cycle in. It's not just the vaccines. I want to make that really clear. He also was saying that AIDS was caused by poppers, these drugs that you can inhale.
No, and he also has separately been very focused on the planet and on, for example, he's gone into the whole thing of food and raw milk and getting chemicals out of, you know, foods.
And some of the things he says, it's interesting. They're logical. I think most people would agree we probably need less additives in our food. But then it veers into this area of really extreme, rhetoric. Yeah.
Donald Trump's pick of Kash Patel to potentially lead the FBI is bringing increased attention to Patel's extreme views and his so-called enemies list. In his 2023 book, Government Gangsters, Patel has an entire appendix listing what he calls members of the executive branch deep state. The list, which contains 60 names, including Democrats, Biden administration officials, and even some Trump appointees. Among them, former Attorney General Bill Barr, former Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein, Trump's former White House counsel Pat Cipollone, and Special Counsel Robert Hur. In the book, Patel also calls for firing the top ranks of the FBI, prosecuting leakers and journalists, and replacing the national security workforce with people who don't undermine the president's agenda. Yesterday on Capitol Hill, some senators were asked about Trump's selection of Kash Patel.
You know, I don't know him. I have read some of his comments and seen them, and I think that's the reason that this process starting earlier is much to our benefit. We're going to get a chance to sit down. I'll get a chance to talk to him. I have a big FBI presence in my state. We do all the background checks for all the guns, and it's an important part of the FBI's mission, and I want to see it protected.
If you have the power of that office, the FBI directorate, and you're using it to go after political enemies or the press or people you regard as adversaries, that's worse than incompetence. That's abuse of power that you have. And that power is awesome.
You know, we're talking right now about the potential replacement, though, for Christopher Wray, somebody Donald Trump appointed in 2017, somebody that has bipartisan support with many senators on the Republican side and the Democratic side. He's supposed to have a 10-year term that started in 2017, but there has been the signal from Donald Trump that he's going to fire Christopher Wray. And Willie, he's going to replace him. He wants to replace him. He wants to replace him with somebody that has an enemies list, somebody who was selling boots, cash boots a couple of years ago, but has an enemies list, and he's written it out, the people he wants to go after, a lot of Republicans, a lot of Democrats, a guy who has promised that he is going to go after reporters and journalists and arrest them for not following conspiracy theories about the 2020 election that have been disproven time and time again. Stand by. We're going to be talking about Dinesh D'Souza having to apologize in a second. And also saying he's going to shut down the FBI. He's going to clear it all out. This is, man, if it is not the most radical pick, it's one of the most radical picks. And again, if this is something that the Republican Party endorses in 2024, 2025, then it actually will be a Republican Party in the Senate that has reached a new low.
And back to your thought about Christopher Wray, the reason FBI directors get 10-year terms is because that is supposed to be insulated from politics. By definition, it spans at least 2 presidencies. So Donald Trump, as you said, appointed Christopher Wray in 2017. He's supposed to have a term that goes till 2027. He said he's going to fire him. And Kash Patel is a guy who is really the pure distillation of MAGA energy. He is a loyalist to the end of Donald Trump. His entire being, his entire public persona, his entire life has been run in the last decade or so in support of Donald Trump and attacking his perceived enemies, as you said, and perpetuating conspiracy theories. The job of FBI director is deadly serious because their work is deadly serious and something that should not be used as an appointment of a loyalist, a friend, to attack perceived enemies. But that's what Donald Trump has chosen here. Open question whether the Senate goes along with this. David, you actually profiled Kash Patel a few years ago. For people who don't know him, in the piece, you detail how Patel rose from being an obscure Hill staffer to a key operative in Trump's battle with the intelligence community. So what more should people know about Kash Patel as we enter this process?
I think, Willie, the main thing is that he is the most loyal, extreme in his loyalty member of Trump's entourage that I've encountered. When he was sent to the Pentagon as chief of staff under Chris Miller in a very brief period at the end of 2020, serving under Secretary Miller, he came with a very specific and focused agenda. This is what President Trump wants me to do. He was not there to run the Pentagon as chief of staff in the usual way. He was there to conduct specific political goals. There was a list of them that Trump wanted troops removed from various battlefields around the world. Patel tried his best, in most cases failed, to get those troops out of the way. He wanted to install a Trump loyalist in a key position at the National Security Agency, one of our most sensitive intelligence collection facilities. He talked with the CIA about reducing the Pentagon's support for CIA operations, whole string of things. He made clear to the people that he was working with at the Pentagon that he was not there to do the normal job of being a chief of staff, but to do the president's bidding. And I think what's of concern when you think about him as FBI director is the FBI director has extraordinary powers to conduct surveillance on American citizens. And those powers to listen into phone calls, to read mail, so to speak, would be directed by somebody who has shown that he has a very political agenda. And as you said, in his book, he had an enemies list.
Yes.
What should be the Democrats' plan to take advantage of the best situation they have, frankly, which is in the closeness of the House?
I think this is great news for America. And to Ali's point earlier, I mean, you're talking a few votes, so a member oversleeps and misses a vote. Now the speaker has to go to Leader Jeffries and try to get support there. And so I think Democrats will extract as much as they can in terms of passing sane bills through the House.
Well, that also means Democrats can't get sick, can't oversleep, can't take a day off.
No, that's a good point. But this is great news, I think, because at the end of the day, the speaker needs Leader Jeffries on a number of these bills, from, the debt ceiling negotiations to everything else. And so that means that any sort of radical right-wing policies that he would want to put in place will be extracted by Leader Jeffries in those negotiations. So this is great news for all of us sane Americans who just want things to function properly.
All right, Vaughn, then there's the Senate side and this ongoing push and pull over Trump's picks for his administration. Pete Hegseth, his choice for defense secretary, is back on Capitol Hill today. I think he's got 3 or 4 meetings. On Monday, we heard some senators defending him against allegations of sexual impropriety and public intoxication. Let's listen.
They're throwing disparaging remarks at someone who has earned a great deal of credibility. Are soldiers sometimes wild childs? Yeah, that can happen. But it is very clear that this guy is the guy who, at a time when Americans are losing confidence in their own military and our ability to project strength around the world, that Pete Hegseth is the answer to that concern.
It's entirely possible that some members of the Senate have a different definition of what wild child means or the age at which that is appropriate. But my question more directly to you, Vaughn, is how much political capital is Donald Trump willing to spend on Pete Hegseth?
Well, we so far haven't seen Donald Trump go on social media to go and project confidence or demands that Pete Hegseth pass through this confirmation process.
Is he making phone calls as he did for Matt Gaetz?
Not that we've heard at this point in time here. I think Pete Hegseth is somebody who is sort of his lone man walking up on Capitol Hill, having to go and answer the questions for himself. I want to let you, though, listen to Jason Miller, who was the Trump campaign advisor and now transition advisor here this morning over on CNN, talk about Pete Hegseth's confirmation process. Take a listen.
So when it comes to Pete Hegseth, there aren't any concerns, and we feel very good about his positioning for being confirmed by the Senate. Now, we have to take the process very seriously. This is one of the rare times where you're going to hear me say that the process when it comes to this is very important, and that's because the Senate takes it so serious to go and have the one-on-one meetings, to have these confirmation hearings, to give senators the chance to kick the tires and get some of these questions answered on their own. I believe that Pete Hegseth is ultimately, when he has a chance to present his case, it's going to come across very clearly that he's going to be a great person to lead the DOD and that he didn't do anything wrong.
Miller projecting a confidence there, but let's be very clear. Team Trump is not naive to the dynamics of the Republican Senate right now. And just like Ali knows, when you are looking at the reality that they cannot lose more than 3 Republican senators, Donald Trump has a tendency to, bully or threaten to go after fellow Republicans. But you can't exactly do that with these senators that we're talking about that will be the ones that determine whether Pete Hegseth and others are confirmed. If you look at the likes of Susan Collins, who is up for re-election in 2026, you could try to primary her, but Donald Trump lost the state of Maine by 7 percentage points, and any other Republican, there would be a good chance that they would not win that Senate seat in 2026. Lisa Murkowski, he tried to primary her back in 2022, but he failed to do so. You look at the likes of John Curtis, the Mitt Romney replacement out of Utah, he's got a 6-year term, a more moderate Republican voice. Mitch McConnell, he's already announced that he's retiring. So some of these senators, you could add Todd Young out of Indiana is another one in the mix. He won re-election in 2022, so he is still 4 years away from having to win re-election. So Donald Trump actually only has a cudgel against his fellow Republicans to a certain degree. They have a lot of independence in political protection right now, and so there's a recognition and a cognizance that it's going to be up to Pete Hegseth to go and personally convince and woo these senators that he is confirmable.
All right, Ali, I want to play a fascinating moment, I think, from Monday when Pete Hegseth was meeting with Senator Tommy Tuberville, and the media was brought in to take some video. Let me play that.
It's like a gaggle in the locker room after a game.
So that article suggests you have an alcohol problem.
Okay, thank you guys. All right, thanks, guys. Let's go. Thank you, guys. Let's, guys. Exit right here behind you. Let's go, guys.
Talking about that New Yorker article that quoted a number of people who had worked around Pete Hegseth, an article we have not confirmed, but that he often drank to the point of intoxication and had to be helped. What's your take? Is that stuff landing? Is Hegseth in trouble?
These are serious allegations that we've seen, both in the Jane Mayer piece and then also in a lengthy police report around a sexual misconduct allegation. An investigation was done. Charges were never filed. Hegseth's lawyer says he paid a settlement to that woman because he was worried about his career. But these are serious questions for any nominee to be faced with during and in the beginning stages of a nominating process. I do think, though, that senators, at least on the sexual misconduct piece of this, when we have caught them in the hallways, they have been willing, if not eager, to explain those away or brush them off as just hearsay. And it seems, at least, when you hear people like Senator Lummis, who you played earlier, talking about wild childs, I mean, these are flimsy ways to brush off serious allegations, but ultimately,
can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, of course.
While you've been talking, and let me get your reaction to this, because Josh Hawley was just on camera. And he made a pretty lengthy answer to the question, essentially, that I was asking you. But I want to read the second half of it. He said, I would say to some of my Republican colleagues who are very worried, and a number are expressing public concerns, I would say before they make up their minds, let him have his hearing, listen to him under oath, let's go through the process, give him a shot to answer this, and lay out his vision for the DOD. Is that what we would expect to hear from Josh Hawley? It wouldn't be what I would say is, and I'm looking at the whole top of it, he says, you know, he has denied all of these accusations. It is not, however, a full-throated endorsement, at least this one piece of it.
It's not a full-throated endorsement, but I think you can read that in one of two ways, and it's sort of a choose-your-own ending here. You can read that as someone who's skeptical and saying, let's let the process play out and let the chips fall where they may. Certainly, that was some of the commentary I was hearing from skeptical or reluctant Republicans with Matt Gaetz. Or you could read that as someone who is just trying to play into the role of advise and consent. It makes a ton of sense that these senators, Republican or Democrat, would say, let's have the hearings, let's have the process play out. All of that makes sense because that's how this is typically done. So I'm not exactly shocked that Hawley would say that. I do think that it feels, at least publicly, and again, we don't know what's being said in these rooms, and I've been in rooms just like the one we're showing on the screen, for example, with Pam Bondi yesterday when she was in front of Chuck Grassley. The question I tried to ask her was, okay, what does it mean to investigate the investigators? Those are the questions that the media are asking in terms of the sticking points or the controversial points of some of these nominees. I don't know if those are the questions that senators are asking behind closed doors. Certainly they like to keep the process piece of this quiet. That behooves people on both sides of this equation, whether you're a Republican senator who wants to avoid the ire and the pressure of Trump world, or whether you're the Trump transition team who wants these things to be hashed out behind closed doors. So we don't know if they're taking it seriously privately, but I can say publicly, and in some of the clips that we've played already, we have people either saying, let's let the process play out, or alternatively, that they're downplaying the allegations and what we've seen reported in the press. I do think this is why FBI background checks are so important and why the regular process of vetting these nominees is so important, to just get everything out there and give senators the most information possible so that they can make informed decisions on this. Of course, it's easy because politics is always involved, but, you know, in theory.
Yeah, and I mean, one way to look at this, Congressman, is that if you do at least give Pete Hegseth a hearing, if you go through the confirmation process, that's a step further, right, than Matt Gaetz got. So you can say, you know, we tried to give him the opportunity, but I wonder if, having already said no, essentially, to Matt Gaetz, making it clear that his nomination wasn't going anywhere, that it makes it tougher to go against anyone else.
Well, Chris, I think Josh Hawley is trying to buy time for Pete Hegseth and for some of these other more controversial nominees. What they don't want is another episode where 4 or 5 Republicans come out of the gate and say, under no circumstances are we going to vote for this candidate, and they have to withdraw the way Matt Gaetz did, which was frankly a little bit embarrassing for the administration just about a week after the nomination was announced. And I really think what you see here, Chris, if you listen closely, especially to some of these more centrist Republicans, I think they're starting to realize that Donald Trump needs them about as much as they need him. And I think that's why a lot of them are being a little bit more bold than we've been accustomed to seeing Republicans on the Hill when it comes to saying, no, we need to have a process here. We need to ask all these candidates the tough questions at least, and then we'll make our decision. That's not how it typically works in the GOP under Donald Trump. A lot of people just want to walk in lockstep with Donald Trump. I think you're seeing a break there, at least in the Senate.
All right, Michael, you understand how these power plays work, having worked for who you did. How do you see these fights playing out, especially if they do get to the point of actual hearings, the ones that do?
I think in the moment, obviously, it sets the tone in terms of whether it'll be an acrimonious relationship or whether Senate Republicans and the Trump White House can work together. But it is a transactional relationship. So even if this gets ugly now, they still need each other over the next 4 years. And so I'm not concerned about that. I am interested to see how Mitch McConnell is going to play this, because he's got the political capital to manage this either way. And so I'm interested to see how he handles that, because I think many members of his conference will follow behind him in some way.
All right, Attorney General Merrick Garland and top Justice Department officials are trying to get career staffers to stay at their posts through the next administration. Sources tell the Washington Post that Garland is stressing that institutional knowledge is important as new leaders take hold. The Post notes that the weeks since President-elect Donald Trump's victory have been filled with uncertainty and tumult for many of the more than 100,000 individuals who work at the nation's largest law enforcement agency, according to people familiar with the situation. But according to the paper, the appointment of Trump loyalist Pam Bondi for Attorney General brought some relief, those people said, tinged with uncertainty over whether Trump would erase existing firewalls between the White House and the Justice Department's criminal investigations. So far, there has not been a mass exodus from the agency. The Post notes that many career employees worked for the Justice Department during the first Trump administration and are waiting to see who is appointed to head different divisions before deciding how to proceed.
You know, Jonathan Lemire, it's so fascinating. We're really seeing an evolution of thinking here. Post-election, there was, of course, the election shock. The night after, we saw the week after. We're now starting to see Democrats, a lot of Democratic leaders and thought leaders actually saying, hold on a second, hold on. We had vertigo for a week or two, but we basically, like Molly Jong Fast said, we've got institutions. We've got to rely on the Senate institution. We've got institutions. The House is basically split. There's going to be a one-vote margin. We still have the federal courts, and we have the bureaucracies. And this is where Merrick Garland saying batten down the hatches actually seems to make a whole lot of sense, because if people quit, if they resign in large numbers, that makes the job easier to fill those positions. Whereas if they stay there, if the professionals stay and basically man their quarters, then suddenly you're going to be getting pushback not only from Republicans in the Senate who give a damn about national security and intel and America's health and the rule of law, but you're going to get it from the House, where, you know, yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Republicans who want to be in the House, who want to be governor or senator or another position where they can't take extreme positions. So you start going, and like Molly Jong Fast wrote in her latest piece for Vanity Fair, there's a need to stand there, to push back, to do your job, and to not panic.
Right, because it's so far been very different than what we saw in the aftermath of the 2016 election. 2016, there was shock, but also suddenly anger and resolve. And we saw Democrats really rally to try to stop what the incoming Trump administration, what they thought were its dangerous policies. This time around, Democrats seem really despondent. There has not been a protest movement, at least not yet, in the streets. It's sort of a hopelessness. But I think we're starting to see that change a little bit here in small ways. Yes, Merrick Garland's note there to career staffers could be a piece of this. In the House, we're seeing Congressman Jamie Raskin challenge Jerry Nadler for the leadership of a key House committee there. To put him sort of at the front lines of the resistance to the Trump administration. That's not something we often see Democrats do, but Raskin, decades younger, says it is than Nadler, says it's time for a new generation. It's time for a fresh face. We certainly know there's plenty of talent on the Democratic governors who plan to do the same. So there is a sense here. The institutions, look, they held just barely. Many Democrats believe in Trump's first term. It will be that much harder this time around with Trump taking office with more of a wind at his back and an even more pliant Supreme Court. But I think the message from Democrats is starting to change, echoing what we heard from Vice President Harris even in her farewell to staff, saying, look, stay in this fight. You can't give up. It's too important.
All right, on